Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Pray that you'll bless our time together today. Pray that we'll be able to encourage people with the fact that while the news may seem bad, we know that that likely points to the return of the Lord to clean this mess up. But in the meantime, Lord, give us the strength and perseverance to occupy until the Lord returns. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. So I apologize for the late start. I sort through a vast amount of information each week, the equivalent of at least several books worth of things, and it's very difficult to organize this stuff. Here's some of the platforms we're on. We are working, trying to get a podcast going, which would be audio only, because I know that some people have limited bandwidth and the video doesn't really work for them. So we're working on that. I hope to have some phone calls with some people this week to get that done. And so just pray that that goes smoothly. We're all volunteers around here, so and people have other jobs and that type of thing. So just please indulge us with your patience on that. Again, these are some of the other platforms. These are video platforms that we're on. Probably we'll start relying on the non-YouTube ones more, non-YouTube and non-Facebook, just because of some of the censoring that's going on. So there's some things that I don't really talk about in the terms that I would necessarily talk about them because of the sensitivity to maintaining our YouTube channel, because we do use that for our sermons and other teachings here at FBC. So we do have a subscriber base, and we want to try to respect that because people are used to coming to YouTube. But and I'll try to post links in the description this week of the different social media platforms that I'm on. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, but I've also got an account now on Getter and Telegram that I'm trying to figure out. Telegram's not the easiest platform to use, in my opinion, but I do have there is a link that I'll post that you can go and follow me there. It's more of a one-way channel on Telegram. So anyway, we talk a lot about the convergence of events, the way things are happening rapidly. I'm not going to go over a lot of scriptures today. Again, just to remind you sort of the framework that I use. I do use the prophetic scriptures and the things that are talked about there. For example, we know that 2 Thessalonians 2:3 talks about a great falling away and apostasy, falling away from the truth in the church. That will happen in the end times. We know that in 2 Peter 3 and 2 Peter 4, he talks about perilous times coming and people going away from the truth and giving themselves over to myths. Also in 1 Timothy 4, there's a departure from the truth. We know that this is going to be a problem. For example, I didn't have time to put the video together, but this seems to be going on a rather rapid, epic scale within the church. I saw a number of videos this week, or a couple videos of Paula White, who was the president's main pastor, I guess. She is President Trump's, a very problematic individual. She had a large church down. She and her then husband, I think it was her second husband, had a church in Tampa, the Church Without Walls, which apparently turned into the Church Without Mortgage Payments because it was foreclosed on, and they lost the church. Then she went up and bought another church, and she and her then husband got divorced, and she's now married to Jonathan Cain from Journey, the keyboard guy from the rock group Journey. There's a couple videos of her around right now. Susan Puzio, P-U-Z-I-O, has a book out on her. I think you can get it on Kindle for free. P-U-Z-I-O, it's on Paula White. But the videos of her, again, going to this think tank series that the Unification Church and Mother Moon, who claims to be the Holy Spirit, her husband claimed he was the Messiah, the second coming of Christ. He married her. She's the Holy Spirit, and she does these video things. They're just creepy as all get out. And there's Paula White speaking at these almost every time. And the most recent one that they did a few weeks ago, she was like actually presenting flowers and bowing down to Mother Moon. It's just very creepy. And I mean, this is indicative of the things that are going on in the church. You also see a lot of problems in the church with things like the Enneagram, and I spoke on that almost 2 years ago. A lot of good that did. I don't think it's slowed down much at all. It's coming into a lot of Christian universities, colleges, churches, and it's just completely, it comes from a guy named Richard Rohr, largely. It has pagan roots. Maybe, I suppose you could say New Age roots. I'm not sure that that's exactly correct, but certainly the mystical philosophy of Richard Rohr and his adherence to Catholic mysticism far more than he adheres to the Bible lie at the heart of this thing. And yet it's sweeping over churches. There's all kinds of books and people who have Enneagram businesses. It's just shocking. But this is an indication of one of the things that we talk about, is that there will be an acceleration. All the things that are talked about in Bible prophecy, the building up to the mark of the beast, the building up of the beast and final beast kingdom, the building up to the various wars and the wars that are coming, all those things are going to accelerate. They're going to converge at the same time. And the logistics, the building up of these things that we talk about in Bible prophecy, the mark of the beast, a global economic, religious system. I talked a lot about that last week. And then also, as we get closer to the end, there are going to be people that understand. So I'm not going to review a lot of scriptures today, because I want you to think about the grid work of Bible prophecy as you understand it, and see how the things that I'm going to talk about fit. It is, and I'm talking about, I can't remember, I call it the madness of narratives, or the narratives of madness. It could be either one. I mean, the world has just gone stark raving mad. There's a lot of examples of that. Some are humorous. We saw the thing down in Virginia this week with people stuck in a 45 to 75 mile backup on Interstate 95. Now, Interstate 95, I don't like Interstate 95. I've driven it through North and South Carolina and down into Florida many times, and it's not a road. If I can avoid that road, I avoid it, because it's just, when they built those roads, the population of the United States was about half as it is now, and Florida was much less populated than it is now, and everybody's going to Florida. And the vast majority of them probably take Interstate 95, and it's just not a safe road. So then you couple that with the fastest growing, richest area in the United States now is the suburbs of Washington, D.C., built with our tax money. Well, or the money all the money that's fit to print, right? Very wealthy suburbs. So they had a snowstorm this week. One report, I heard one news report, and some places got 8 to 10 inches. So that's a significant snowstorm. But some people were trapped on there for 36 hours on the highway. And their electric cars were running out of juice. Their cars were running out of gas. And so they were saying, if you needed a tow, you're going to wait for, there's thousands of people ahead of you in line. And the road was icy. I mean, but nobody paid attention to the warnings. And I heard one news report said the snow was up to my ankles. I mean, okay. Now here's a story out of California. Those storm shows limits of relying on GPS. So people they had to go over the Sierras, like from Sacramento to Reno. So that's where Donner passes, the people that the cannibalism, important story in American history about pioneers and people that got trapped there. It can get treacherous very, very quickly. So people got on and they found that the major roads, which would be US 50, I think it is, and Interstate 80, were closed because of snow. And Google, so what happened? Google Maps rerouted them across 2-lane roads over the same mountains. Now, I think there's some responsibility there on the part of Google, okay? But if the roads are closed because of snow, like when you looked at Google Maps for Interstate 95 backup earlier this week, it was red lines all the way and indicating that it was closed. And they'll do that for snowstorms. Google Maps is a wonderful thing. But there's also some responsibility if the 2 major roads over the mountains are closed because of snow. You would think that people would think that maybe the 2-lane side roads are going to be not so good either, right? That makes a little bit of sense. And Google Maps is great. I remember Pam and I, 4 years ago when we were in Israel, we were driving up in the Golan. And the Golan is pretty sparsely populated. Israel, by the way, is building some additional settlements up in the Golan. Their goal is to double the population in the Golan. They're never giving it back to Syria. So that if the Syrians are holding out any dream of that, they're not going to give it back, because when the Syrians did have it, they used to launch rockets down on the farmers on the kibbutzes down along the Sea of Galilee. You can't give it back. And they would do the same thing again. But I remember we're up there, so it's not very heavily populated, and we're coming up the road, and I looked at Google Maps, and it became red ahead of me about a mile, and I could see a couple miles down the road, and there was one car. PM, you remember this. There was one car, and I'm like, what is going on? How am I going to have to slow down? Well, what happened was there was a T intersection there, and another car came up that I couldn't see, stopped at the intersection, then pulled in front of me, and I had to slow down because I didn't want to hit that car. It was very freaky that it was like, there's like 3 cars in the Golan area, in the Golan, and it's telling me where I'm going to be slowing down. So anyway, so the fact that people rely on these things so much now is they're wonderful tools. I love technology, but there's also, you got to be responsible when you use it. Now, one of the other narratives that you're going to see, and I didn't have time to put all of this into, if you could back that slide out, I didn't have time to put this all into last Sunday in the New York Times, and I'll put it in a future presentation. They had their whole Sunday review section was, what do they call this? The Disaster Atlas. World on Fire and they had picture after picture after picture of all of these natural disasters that are taking place. Now, I may have mentioned, I think I mentioned last week, that my view of this is that I don't deny that these things are happening. We had a horrible fire in Colorado. A few people, turns out, looked like they were killed. 1,000 homes destroyed and businesses in a very beautiful area. And it was one of the things where people didn't expect this to happen where they lived. And all of a sudden there was a storm and the dry grass got caught on fire. The embers were blowing because the winds were blowing 100, 120 miles an hour, and hot embers blow, and the blowing creates more fire. And we see all of these natural disasters. There's a lot of them. I think there are 8 or 9 active volcanoes on planet Earth right now. You can look on some of the flight apps and websites there, and you can see where the plumes are and that type of thing. But there's 8 going on. There's a lot of earthquakes. It seems to be more earthquakes that are happening. Now, the government narrative is that's all climate change. It's all global warming. It's all climate change. It's also possible that it could be natural, that the sun has changed and that causes an impact. And there's a dispute now whether we're going into a warming or cooling period. I vote for warming, okay? As I said, I like to play golf, and I'm not aware that it's ever been too warm to play golf on planet Earth. It has been too cold. And I've played down to 18-degree wind chill with my bubble cart and my heater for my cart that sits in the cup holder. One of the great inventions of all time. But the problem is that at some point in this whole end time narrative, we know that these natural disasters are coming. And I think the church needs to be careful of dismissing them and saying, well, that could not be the judgment of God. There would be no judgment of God while I'm here. But God does judge people and cultures and countries and for what they do. And do you think the United States large culture deserves it or not? I talked to you last week about some of the abortion things that have been done, pushing abortion when they can't even tell whether there's a birth defect or not. I mean, they got like a 1 in 90 chance of making that determination. Follow the science. If a guy in government says, I am science, he's a little god in his own mind. So the fact of these natural disasters could be the judgment of God needs to be considered. We shouldn't be so quick to just explain them away naturally, because they might be supernatural. But understand that the large culture is going to have a narrative. And the narrative is going to be man's causing it, or the aliens that are coming. The NASA hired 24 theologians to explain, to help them develop a plan to deal with people when aliens appear. That's NASA. That's not Bible prophecy teachers who focus on Genesis chapter 6. That's NASA. And what's going on with that? I don't know. I'm waiting to see how it all plays out. And, everybody wants to predict what the world's going to be like. And we saw a lot of predictions. So now here we are again with the Omicron virus, and we need to talk about that. And I refer to this as Charlie Vector 019er for purposes of trying to avoid censorship. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. One thing that seems to be apparent is that nobody likes to be sick. And I may have had it a few weeks ago. That's why I didn't do a prophecy update. I don't know. Maybe I just had a cold. Maybe I had the flu. There's a lot of flu going around. It doesn't appear to be as bad as other variants that have come along before. Now, that's what the statistics seem to show. But what is the narrative that's being pushed on you? There are a couple things that are going on, and the narrative is that, oh, goodness, the sky is falling. I'll play you some things today. And the other is we've got to get everybody to take the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, because if you've taken the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, the treatment doesn't work until you get it, if you don't have it. Yeah. Now, that doesn't really, how else do you analyze what they're saying? The things that you're supposed to wear, the mandates that make you wear certain things on your face. I had some lady yell at me, put your thing on your face. And I kind of pushed back. I said, so I'm getting the impression is you have one on, and you think that it needs to be one for you and one for me to protect you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then why don't you wear two? Problem solved. Go pick up one in the parking lot. They're all over the parking lots. I'm sure they're sterile. I mean, I have one. I have it here in the sterile field of my back pocket with my handkerchief. I heard a story this week on Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly's doing a good job on her podcast. She told a story of a lady. She had a lady on. She was in one of these large school districts. I think it might have been Montgomery County, Maryland. She was concerned about making her kids wear things on their face all day. They wouldn't let her speak, and they saw her on the list, and they called the cops. Like a SWAT team showed up and arrested her and took her to jail. This is a school board meeting. And she's spoken in front of the school board because listen, you have to understand, this is they're trying to create the narrative that anybody who doesn't agree with this is just a complete whack job and an extremist. And you're all going to be called extremists. I'm just telling you, you need to be prepared for that. There are a lot of people at work getting demands from employers now because of the OSHA mandate, talk about that in a minute, that if you're in a company over 100 employees, you have to get the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, or if you don't, you have to wear a mask and get tested for Charlie Vector 019er, if you can find a test. And it's worse in other places, Australia, Europe, and that type of thing. And now here is one of our friends. I should have put up my video of him. There was this Economist cover of Emmanuel Macron where he was walking on water a number of years ago. And I kind of took it and photoshopped it and made him sinking because he's kind of been up and down. So he's standing for election this year. He's been in office almost 5 years. And you remember that creepy red eye light above him at his swearing-in ceremony or victory ceremony? It was just creepy. So he just said, listen, you have got to get the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, and I am trying to, common vernacular word for, I'm going to try to tick you off. And he also said, if you don't, I don't consider you a citizen of France. Now listen, this is a tyrant. This is what tyrants do. People born in France have citizenship rights. But what you have now is you have these extreme left-wing, New World Order tyrants like Macron coming in, and they're like the Jacobins. Go read what the Jacobins did. So they had a revolution, the left came to power, and then Jacobins came along, and what did they do? They killed everybody, including the people on the left. There's a magazine that circulates in the United States called Jacobin. Go look at it. Estimated, after the French Revolution, they beheaded 300,000 people. Historical fact. So here's Macron. I think his wife, mother figure, lets him out a lot, and he gave an interview to Le Parisien this week, and he said, you're not a citizen, you're not this, and he was angry, and he was confronting people. This is kind of interesting. Now listen, I'm not gonna, he used a word, common vernacular word for, a bodily function, and that's what he wanted to blank you off. I think we all know that is. And even in France, he got some pushback. This is a headline from Le Pignon, I guess it is. And it says, Emmanuel Macron, the return of the disruptor. And what it says here in this editorial cartoon on the right, it says, if you are not, hang on. If you are not vaccinated in the mountains, if you're not vaccinated in town, if you are not vaccinated at sea, blank you. It's interesting. Now I'm talking about a world leader, and I have to kind of clean it up for him. The unvaccinated, I really want to blank them off, Macron said. These comments triggered an avalanche of reactions from the opposition, in the face of which the French are divided 3 months before the presidential election. We have now therefore found, and the Emmanuel Macron of 2017 has now been resurrected. And he's been given some indications, like there was a big protest at the Sorbonne University this week about Macron's statements that he's trying to get rid of the people who have been influenced, the professors that have been influenced by American wokeism. And I'm all for getting rid of those guys out of the university, or at least getting the alternative in there. But it seems like, every time he makes it, it's like one step forward with this guy and about 80 steps back, because he's a tyrant and he'll do whatever it is. So here's a little video. This is a video from one of the French televisions, and it's sort of talking about they're looking at papers. This is the interview that he did with Le Parisien, where he talked about, I want to really tick these people off. So they went out and they talked to people on the street, and they're like, sure, I'm going to do that. Here's a report from, I think this is from CNBC.
Controversy at the moment is that they're trying to convert this health pass into a vaccine pass, which is up until now you could show a negative test as well to enter this venue of under 24 hours. Now they will scrap this altogether if this pass goes through, if this law goes through, and it will only be a vaccination status. That's been quite controversial over the past few days. Parliament is currently debating this. It's been postponed a few times, and it's been quite controversial. And of course, the comments that we heard last night from Emmanuel Macron in an interview in Le Parisien kind of put a little bit of oil on the fire, and created even more controversy around this, when he said he wanted, using that slang term, saying he wanted to, in a sense, to hassle or aggravate the unvaccinated. A lot of people have been criticizing this comment, saying it's counterproductive, really, that trying to get to this pass through Parliament at the moment, they want to show that it's to protect people, not to hassle them. We've heard from Marine Le Pen commenting on this, the far-right candidate, saying that this is vulgar and violent comments from Emmanuel Macron. Mélenchon from the far left saying that this is an astonishing confession. Valérie Pécresse, who could be one of his key contenders, the centre-right candidate, talking this morning that she was shocked about his comment, that this is an insult, and that insult is never a solution. And look, a lot of people saying again that this is unpresidential, and maybe they are right. While Emmanuel Macron is not officially candidate in the race, this kind of comment show that he's definitely behaving like a candidate, at least, and entering the ring there, and with this very feisty kind of comments that he's made in the past. This is a typical Macron style. Remember those brain-dead comments about NATO a few years ago? These are kind of punchy expressions that Emmanuel Macron likes to use. So certainly he will not win those 10% of unvaccinated people in the country. So there's nothing to lose in making this kind of...
So the estimate is that there may only be 10% of the country in France that's unvaccinated. So what's up with that? So here's another report. So the health minister came out, and let me turn the sound down on this. Who bugs the life? Who ruins the life of our health workers? Who have been mobilized for 2 years, snowed under? And our ICUs to save patients today are mainly not vaccinated. Who ruins the life of our shopkeepers, restaurant owners, theaters, cinemas, which have been living with a sword of Damocles over their head for the past few years? When they don't want to close their business, it is those who are opposed to that. Who makes people live in loneliness and fear faced with the epidemic? Well, I know the answer to that. You do, you lunatic. Here's a French opposition guy, and again, this is in French. So he says, listen, Macron wants to do this, and we know where this is going. 77% vaccinated to maybe 90% so it's the small percentage of those eligible, and his health policy has failed. And then he gets to the rub at the end. I'll fast forward it so you can see what he says. Forfeiture of citizenship. There's only one responsible for me. He is in front of us. He's the one who's responsible. And it's time to leave. Become aware of this dangerous policy of the past. Now the debates will change tone in the National Assembly because the deputies have understood that this past was a prototype of what? The Chinese social credit system. Exactly what Naomi Wolf has said, and for which I've been dinged for playing a video of hers. And that's the ultimate goal. By the way, it didn't change the vote much. It passed in the main sort of, I don't know what they call it, House of Commons in the Parliament, the House part, like 294, 283 to 94, and then it was going to the Senate. It's going to pass, this mandate. It's just, and understand that what's happening in Europe is coming here to the United States. I hope that it would be 6 months, but it looks like it might be 3 months, and it could be 30 days. That's the way it's going. The tennis star, right, holder of the record of the most major championships, tied with two others, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, went down to Australia to play in the Australian Open. He's won it 9 times. And they said, hey, Novak, we don't care what Australia Tennis told you. If you don't have the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, you ain't coming in. Well, wait, I have a thing that shows that I had it and I have natural immunity. That doesn't count for anything in Australia. Nothing. So now he's in a hotel. They're going to deport him. He's appealed it. So I want you to see the narrative part of this, though, as to how this is going. So the most important political newspaper in the United States is the Washington Post. It is owned by Jeff Bezos, technocrat extraordinaire, one of the richest men on the planet, worth a couple $100 million. And that's even after he gave his first wife like $50 billion in a divorce settlement. And he's running around with his space thing and says, you know, eventually Earth will be like a national park and we'll live elsewhere. And of course, he'll be there because he's got the money, right? So his newspaper this morning in the editorial page had this editorial cartoon about Novak Djokovic. Back out on that, if you could, Brian. Novak Djokovic and his partner versus the immunocompromised. Do you see the image there? Do you understand what the narrative is? It's not just Macron. Back it out. I've got a video I'm going to play. This is baby Trudeau from Canada, interviewed on a show. I don't know if it was last week or a couple months ago, but listen to what he says about this, about the thing, the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, and his goal should be coming up here. It's more dangerous at the moment because we are making important choices. We are deciding that, yes, we will get out of this pandemic by the state-approved treatment. We all know people who are a little bit hesitant. We will continue to try to convince them. But there are also people who are fiercely against it. They are extremists who don't believe in science or progress. They're often misogynists, also often racist. It's a small group that muscles in. So we have to make a choice in terms of leaders, in terms of the country. Do we tolerate these people? Or do we say, hey, most of Quebec people, 80% have it. Do we want to come back to things we like doing? It's not those people, the ones who have it, who are blocking us. It's not those who fill our hospitals across the country. Excuse me, but there is no debate on the science. We are going to take back the things. So yes, I took a very hard position against these people. Do you see, now are you seeing a common thread here? You're going to see even more in just a moment. So here's Liberation, one of the left-leaning newspapers. Left-leaning newspaper in France is kind of like pointing out, a tree in everybody's yard. It's because they're all over the place. But here it is. What does it say? Day irresponsibles. 8%. That's causing all the problems. Can't question the state-approved treatment. Can't question that. So what do you do? And in Italy, Libero newspaper this week, everybody over age 50, you have to have it or you can't leave your house. I'm not going to stay in Europe, my friends. And it's tyranny. I mean, there's a debate now about should we close schools again? The teacher unions are in favor. Why do we pay these people if they're not working? Stop paying them. You can shut down everybody else's business. Shut down their paycheck, for crying out loud. Lori Lightfoot, you don't like it? Do something about it. Doesn't keep you from doing other stupid things. Good grief. Here's a big two-page thread. Irresponsibles. Here's Australia, the health director. I believe he's the health director of the Northern Territories, talking about the new rules. You used to be able to do 5 things if you had not taken the state-approved treatment. Now they're cutting it to 3. Here's his statement. Got to get the mask off first. Okay, why is this not?
The fully vaccinated can continue as they were. For people who are not vaccinated, lockdown rules will apply to everyone 16 and above. If you are not fully vaxxed, stay home. You are at greater risk of catching COVID, becoming ill, and needing hospital care. You may only leave home for 3 reasons. Medical treatment, including COVID testing or vaccination. For essential goods and services like groceries, power tokens, medications. To provide care and support to a family member or person who cannot support themselves. You cannot travel more than 30 kilometres from your home when leaving for one of the 3 reasons, or the nearest practical destination. If you need to go to the hospital and it's more than 30 kilometres from your home, that's okay. There are only 3 reasons to leave the home now, not 5. Work is not a reason to leave the home for the unvaccinated. The Chief Health Officer has also determined that restriction of movement is critical right now and that 1 hour of exercise for the next 4 days is not essential. Remember, these restrictions only apply to those who are not fully vaccinated. There has been plenty of time for people to get vaccinated. People who are not fully vaccinated present the greatest risk of spreading the virus and are the most at risk of becoming seriously ill if they get the virus.
So I have talked in the past about a couple of exercises that Johns Hopkins School of Public Health did, sometimes in connection with the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum. One they had back in 2018 that's kind of missed everybody's view, but you can go to the website, Johns Hopkins, the Center for Health Policy or School of Public Health, Center for Health Security, excuse me, and go to their website, centerforhealthsecurity.org, I think it is, and you can go down and look at the exercises that they've had about what do we do if there's a pandemic. And look, we want people that are involved in public health to plan for things. But I've watched these videos, I've read the documents, and it's more about, to be honest with you, it's more about controlling the flow of information than it is how do we treat people and get them healthy again. Well, with one exception. There's one treatment that they seem to always come back to, that's okay. And they'll focus on that. And this has been their pandemic exercises. So this one was called CLAD X. Then there was one in late 2019. I talked about it a week or so after it happened, Event 201. And we played the videos. If you want, by the way, if you're going to go look, go to session 4. That's the one that I think will be most helpful. But I was doing some more research this week, and they had one in October 2017. Okay? And it says this is a training exercise, a date completed, October 2017. So this is not something that came out of the blue. I want you to look, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. Complete a project, SPARS pandemic scenario. This is a training exercise based on a fictional scenario. And they've been clear. They went back to the 201 website and added a statement. This was a fictional thing. We didn't predict 65 million people were going to die. So, because everybody was talking about it, like, seems like some of the stuff was planned. And then we have the World Economic Forum come out with their Great Reset. And then earlier this year, in, I think it was April, the Great Narrative. Because we're going to tell you what the story is. We're going to tell you what to think. This is a training exercise based on a fictional scenario. It is a teaching and training resource for public health and government officials so they can practice responses and better protect the public's health. So let's look at what they say. So here's the preface. And now, what do you see there on the right? Social media icons. And so they talk about possible future in 2025, and they talk about the echo chamber, unbridled global access to information coupled with social fragmentation and self-affirming worldviews. What are they saying? We'll have a problem with misinformation because people have access to information. I'm going to walk you through this a little bit. So, got to get control of the social media. That's what they said. Then they talk about a possible cure coming out. And the communication dilemma is responding to public and political pressure to share information about potential MCMs in the development pipeline, even though information may be incomplete or proprietary. What are they saying? We need to keep those quiet. Because we will tell you, this is what Jacinda Ardern says in New Zealand. I will tell you what the truth is on this thing. And if you're getting information from anybody else, don't trust it. I am the source of truth. So, can you imagine what kind of child she and Fauci would have? I am science and I am truth. Food for thought. What risks do public health agencies face if the public media and/or political leaders feel that information about potential treatment options is being withheld? Was that anything that's going on in the world today? What kinds of outreach could public health agencies perform in advance of a crisis to mitigate any perceived lack of transparency? If such a perception emerges in the crisis, then how might it be diffused? In other words, what are they saying? You have to control the narrative. It's all about the narrative. This is what the emerging church did. It was all about the narrative of Scripture. We got to get rid of this sin and atonement and that type of thing. That's not, people aren't comfortable with that narrative. So we need to come up with a new narrative for Christianity. And then a potential state-approved treatment to prevent the thing. And they said this presents a communication dilemma. Maintaining trust in government processes for ensuring the timely development of safe and effective state-approved treatments when novel threats arise. Well, what's going on in the world right now? Novel threat, running all over the world. People here in church have it. Pray for them. Pray for, there's people all over sick about everything. I asked for prayer for my nephew. Praise the Lord, he went home this week, 50 pounds lighter, not a diet I would recommend. Spent time in the hospital on a ventilator, other things. He has a very long recovery ahead of him. And he has to learn to walk again. He has two young children. So pray for him. How might federal health authorities avoid people possibly seeing an expedited state-approved treatment, development, and testing process as somehow rushed and inherently flawed? This is 2017, my friends. This is 3 years. Now 5 years ago. They were concerned that this might happen. Even though that process still meets the same safety and efficacy standards as any other state-approved treatment for the thing you might get, sort of like Charlie Vector 019er. How might federal health authorities respond to critics who propose that liability protection for the state-approved treatment manufacturers jeopardizes individual freedom and well-being? So I'm going to appoint, this week I'm going to award our prophecy update, guest prophecy update badge to the Center for Health Security at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. Once the state-approved treatment becomes broadly available, how might public health communication implement the best practices principle of enabling people to make their own informed decisions about whether to accept the state-approved treatment? But by the way, they don't talk about a mandate here. But this was before the Great Reset came out. It's before the Great Narrative came out. So they were working on the narrative part. Now we've got the implementation added with the Chinese system. Here's another part. Users beware. This is kind of interesting about people who would criticize it. CDC officials. A treatment may be ineffective, but use it anyway. I mean, this is what, so they're saying this is what people on social media are going to say. Going viral. This is kind of an interesting thing. Here's what their communication response is. Responding to the power of graphic images of a child in distress, one story is elevated to a population-level problem. What's that all about? Well, what if somebody has a reaction to the state-approved treatment? What do we have to do? To control the narrative. So I'm going to read, this is, by the way, to my handlers at, then you have the voice chapter, then you have this chapter about what? Treatment injury. Oh, I didn't think that was a thing. But this is Johns Hopkins saying this, and they talk about, this is all fictional, okay? They talk about a fictional character who got online and found people who had reactions to the state-approved treatment. And then she correlated them on a map. And people are doing this. Smart people, a lot of smart people in the world. They call her Epigirl. And they say, the federal government became concerned about the validity of Epigirl's anecdotal data and the widespread sharing of patient information via the internet. Now they're concerned about it. Why? Because when it gets out there, they can't control the narrative. But they're going to do it, like a lot of us have received requests from our employers to say, you have to tell me what your status is. Never had the question asked before. Been working some job or another since I'm 14 years old. So that's 53 years. Actually, I started at 11. I was a paper boy. I want you to understand my concern about the narrative and what the French politician said about the social credit system and the merging, how this is all merging and running together and, what do I say, converging and accelerating. And we're going to be faced with some hard choices. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. That's one of the things we need to do. Put on the whole armor of God. That's the other thing. But this is, and again, I took this from the Australian government website. What do they say? State-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er claims scheme. So if you've been injured by it, they'll reimburse you. Who suffer a moderate to significant impact following an adverse reaction. So these people who say that this doesn't happen, Marjorie Taylor Greene cited the VAERS database, the government database, in a Twitter post this week. She is permanently banned for passing along misinformation. Permanently banned from Twitter. Just like somebody 2 years ago yesterday who was permanently banned from Twitter, who was the president of the most powerful country in the world. And yet people were saying, what is banned from Twitter, and he's shadow banned, and they keep deleting his posts, and say, you should have told people not to do what they did on January 6th. Why communicate with them through Twitter? Well, not now, you don't. You better figure something else out. We're going to charge you with a crime. And the hatred and vitriol this week of the narrative of that day has been, it's depressing. So, and then here's some more acknowledging loss. Some things they say at the request of this fictional HHS secretary. They convene a series of meetings among senior leadership of the federal health agencies to address policy and program changes being implemented as a result of a departmental review of the response to the pandemic. Among the issues considered were the implementation of growing negative public opinion regarding the state-approved treatment and the government's perceived indifference to victims of the public health response to it, to the pandemic. One senior health official argued that time and a robust medical monitoring program for the recipients of the state-approved treatment, the components of which were already in place, should be sufficient to determine whether public concern about long-term effects was in fact warranted. We have to wait for the data. This is what the fake government official said. Almost everybody I know has said that. Another doctor banned from Twitter, Facebook, YouTube this week. Gave a 3-hour interview to a very popular talk show host. If you want a link to that, you can find it on Rumble. Joe Rogan, Dr. Malone. I downloaded a copy of it, but I think I can find it on Rumble and you can watch. 3 hours, you ought to watch it. People need to understand the fact. Dr. Flynn, she's a psychologist, this is fictional, involved in this whole thing, countered the earlier claim that the public simply needed to wait until the science was clear. Communities around the country went through what some felt was a harrowing public health emergency, only later to confront the possibility, however slim, that the medicine we promised would help them may in fact be what? So again, it's all about the narrative. The senior leaders in attendance concluded, after much prompting by the psychiatrist, that the top political or public health figurehead had publicly recognized the collective sense of vulnerability that the pandemic had elicited. No, that no top political or public health figurehead had publicly recognized the collective sense of vulnerability that the pandemic had elicited, or the strength that the public exhibited under threat of grave danger. In other words, we didn't think that the serfs that we rule could get through this without us, the anointed. Almost sounds like, do you understand Pharaoh and the plagues of Egypt? How did Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God? We know from Romans chapter 1 that God eventually has enough. And a judgment is you're given over to a reprobate mind and you lose the ability to reason. That, I believe, is at pandemic levels. Matt Walsh, suspended from Twitter for 12 hours, bad boy. What did he point out? Well, the news came out this week. The new all-time female champion in winnings on Jeopardy is what? Was born a male. And Matt Walsh made a funny comment. I thought, well, patriarchy wins again. You have a person born male breaking records in NCAA swimming. You have this person, so I guess the patriarchy really, all the stuff about patriarchy was true. This is so troubling. This is a CEO of an Indiana life insurance company. And I'll just play what he said about the claims that they're paying out.
One of our businesses is that we offer group life and disability insurance to employers. And we are seeing right now the highest death rates we have ever seen in the history of this business, not just at One America. The data is consistent across every player in that business. Now, this is primarily working age people, 18 to 64, that are in employers like all the employers on the screen here. And what we saw just in third quarter, we're seeing it continue into fourth quarter, is that death rates are up 40% over what they were pre-pandemic. Now, just to give you an idea of how bad that is, a 3 sigma or a 1 in 200 year catastrophe would be 10% increase over pre-pandemic. So 40% is just unheard of. And what the data is showing us is that the deaths that are being reported as COVID deaths greatly understate the actual death losses among working age people from the pandemic. It may not all be COVID on their death certificate, but deaths are up just a huge, huge numbers. We're also seeing an uptick in disability claims. At first, it was short-term disability claims, and now we're seeing long-term disability, whether it's long COVID or whether it is because people haven't been able to get the health care that they need because the hospitals are overrun. We're seeing those claims start to take up as well. And for One America, we expect the costs of this are going to be well over $100 million. And this is our smallest business. So it's having a huge impact on that. Those costs will trickle towards other employers over time because premiums are starting to go up. So it will cost more for employers. And most of us in the industry are starting to target and to add premium loads onto employers that are based in counties that have low vaccination rates. It's just typically what we would do for underwriting when you have a risk factor like that. There's also going to be higher costs on employers from greater absences, particularly in a time when there's low unemployment and workers are hard to come by.
I will make no comment on whether everything that he said was accurate beyond what he said about the increase. 10% increase would be a 1 in 200 year catastrophe. I quoted him correctly? And now it is what? 40% above the rates in 2019. And that's without examining the causes there's a whole demographic thing, a lot of study that needs to be done. Nevertheless, people they call it the life insurance business, but it's kind of the death business in some respects, death and disability. Other people in the death business have told us here at church that they are noticing the same thing. 20% increase in their business. Something's going on. And again, it's all about the narrative. So here's a good article from the Spectator UK. And so rip it up, the passport. Not the usual passport, but the other one that everybody's trying to put in. Flying anywhere right now is difficult, she says, but for those of us who are jabbed, it is at least possible. So just after Christmas, I set off for America to see my family in Connecticut, armed with the app that we were once assured would never be used as a vaccine passport. It's now precisely that. But to my astonishment, on the way to the airport, my status wasn't there. No records found. My passport had been suspended. My crime, it turned out, was to have caught Omicron in mid-November. Now, do you understand the reaction to all this is, no, wait a minute. She had the treatment, but she caught it. And even though they said, if you get this, you can go, but now you can't go because you caught this new variant. I'm thinking that the shifting of the words from Omicron to moronic actually is a pretty smart thing to do. And I mean, you can read it. She wrote an article. Go to Spectator UK and look it up. So this week, here's the deal. This went a lot longer than I thought. So I'm on slide 51 of 192. Now, you're not going to sit here for all that, and I'm not going to make you sit here. So I will, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll do my Middle East part and some of the other geopolitical things that are going, which are all part of the great narrative. So I'm going to finish this on the state-approved treatment, and I will talk about what happened at the Supreme Court. But listen to what this author says in The Spectator. It's edging towards dystopian, a glimpse into what our future could be if we continue this experiment with these passports, with virtually no discussion of what's going wrong. The idea that anyone should be free to move within a country and free to leave it is hardly extreme. It's something protected in Article 13 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But liberty, once ceded only in an emergency, is hard to win back. Some would say impossible. Victor Davis Hanson, I heard interviewed this week, said, really only happens if people are forced to give it back. And now I'm going to get all the Christian pacifists criticize me. Go ahead, write it up on our YouTube channel, comment, and you'll be deleted and blocked if you're rude. I have said this. Tyranny kills. You have a responsibility to protect your family. And people say, but if you take out somebody who's trying to attack your family, they might not accept the gospel. Okay, I get it. Maybe your family hasn't accepted the gospel. Those are the ones in your immediate sphere of influence, not the guy coming in that's not invited. So go ahead, criticize away, bring it on. You're wrong. You have a responsibility to your family. And don't tell me that the Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not kill. You do not understand Hebrew. That word is do not murder. Self-defense is not murder. Every state recognizes that. Okay. Well, that'll... this is just... Okay, so here's Supreme Court case this week. A bunch of cases got consolidated. For example, here's a brief. Members of Congress, 170 members of Congress, filed a brief in support of the people who are opposing the mandate by the Biden administration. 2 mandates. One, if you get Medicare, Medicaid, everybody in the facility has to have the state-approved treatment. And if you're over 100 employees, you either get the state-approved treatment, or you wear a mask and get tested at least weekly. But good luck finding a test. And in the brief, one of the briefs filed, it says this, as a matter of statutory interpretation, the OSHA Act, OSHA covers only workplace specific hazards and permits only workplace safety measures, workplace specific safety measures, but OSHA now wants to dictate Charlie Vector 019er protection measures outside the workplace to stop a Charlie Vector outbreak that is also taking place outside the workplace. The mandate was thus flawed from its inception. So they had oral argument. Here is, and I'm an attorney, and I've always sort of been of the notion that you go to law school, you got to be, smart. And that may be true, but smart doesn't mean wise. You can be smart but foolish. And that was on display this week. First, well, you'll see who the justice is and her questions of one of the cases that was argued on Friday.
If Congress was going to give an occupational health agency this type of power to essentially regulate directly the employee, rather than telling employers these are the types of things that you would want to do within your workplace, it would have had to provide that clearly.
So what's the difference between this and telling employers where sparks are flying in the workplace, your workers have to wear a mask?
When sparks are flying in the workplace, that's presumably because there's a machine that's unique to that workplace. That is the...
Why is the human being not like a machine if it's spewing a virus, blood-borne viruses? Are you questioning Congress's power or desire that OSHA do this? It already in 1991 told OSHA to issue regulations with respect to Hep C and B.
So to this technocrat, left-wing technocrat, you're just a spewing machine. And I am. You ought to see when I have to clean the spots off of my screen some Sundays. This will be one. Here's Justice Breyer asking some questions, another left-wing member of the court.
Okay, but I want to ask a provisional question. Are you still really asking this court now, today? I assume your arguments you have good arguments in your brief, and so does the government. So I'll assume for the sake of argument that they're both fairly good arguments, okay?
Thank you.
Right. Now, that's an assumption. Right. But, make that assumption with me. Are you still asking us to issue a stay and stop this from taking effect? Like issue a stay today, or tomorrow, or Sunday, or Monday, or Tuesday? The reason I ask that is there are several elements. We have some discretion there. And it was brought up. There are 750,000 new cases yesterday. new cases, nearly 3/4, 700 and some odd thousand, okay? That's 10 times as many as when OSHA put this rule in. The hospitals are today, yesterday, full, almost to the point of the maximum they've ever been in this disease. Okay? And you heard references, studies. I mean, they vary, but some of them say that the hospitalization is 90% or maybe 60% or maybe 80%, but a big percent filled up yesterday or the day before with people who were not vaccinated. Okay? So that's what we're talking about now. And think of the stay requirements. It's both the balance of harms, it's also public interest. Can you ask us, or is that what you're doing now, to say it's in the public interest in this situation to stop this vaccination rule with nearly 1 million people? Let me not exaggerate, nearly 750,000 people. New cases every day? I mean, to me, I would find that unbelievable.
Justice Breyer, we are...
Okay. Would somebody fact check this guy? Because none of that was in the record, by the way. So he's getting it from someplace. And my guess is he doesn't watch Fox. He doesn't listen to Dennis Prager. Doesn't follow any of you on social media. Probably reads the New York Times, the Washington Post, the WAPO, and MSNBC, and CNN. So here's an exchange between Benjamin Flowers, arguing for the state of Ohio, from home because he tested positive for Charlie Vector and couldn't go to Washington. And Sotomayor, who wouldn't come to the oral argument. She didn't. If you see the pictures that they have put up, you'll see that there's an empty chair. Okay, that's not for Elijah, like for Passover or anything like that. She didn't come because the person who sat next to her didn't have. No, he didn't wear a mask. So she didn't come. So here's an exchange between that Justice Sotomayor and Benjamin Flowers from the state of Ohio.
Counsel, those numbers show that Omicron is as deadly and causes as much serious disease in the unvaccinated as Delta did. The numbers, look at the hospitalization rates that are going on. We have more affected people in the country today than we had a year ago in January. We have hospitals that are almost at full capacity with people severely ill on ventilators. We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators. So saying it's a different variant just underscores the fact that without some workplace rules with respect to vaccines or encouraging vaccines, because this is not a vaccine mandate, and requiring masking and requiring isolation of people who have tested for COVID, because none of you have addressed that part of the ETS is to say something that should be self-evident to the world but is not, which is if you're sick, you can't come into work. The workplace can't let you into the workplace, and you shouldn't go on unmasked. Tell me what's irrational about rules of that nature when it is the workplace that puts you into contact with people that will put you at risk.
Well, he responded and he just said, sort of like, I don't really know what you're talking about. I would ask, where'd you get those numbers? Now, you know, this is the satire part of the prophecy update. Maybe she should be the guest updater this week. Okay, I mean, so we'll make a second guest updater, because that's stuff that I won't even say. And I don't think this is anything to be messed around with. We know that here at this church. But I also heard that Joy Reid is losing her show at MSNBC, and maybe she's leaving to take it over because Joy Reid wasn't extreme enough for those lunatics. I'm only speculating. Look at this. This is a report from China Monitor. It's a public report. You can get a PDF of it, and they're talking about building a unified social credit system is a challenge, and China's had some trouble rolling it out. And so they're saying, you know, the social credit system is part of Xi Jinping's vision for data-driven governance. Government organs across regions and administrative levels should join hands to create a coherent information ecosystem. Data sharing challenges continue to hamper the effort. The social credit system is a highly flexible tool that can be applied quickly be applied to address new policy priorities. During the pandemic, government agencies rapidly issued a slew of directives to implement pandemic-related regulations. It was planned. They had plans to do it. Heard one commentator say, you know, here's China's social credit system. And China is having massive demographic problems. That's a significant fact. But somebody once said about, like, and I'll talk a little bit on my midweek update about the Belt and Road Initiative, because I think this plays into Kazakhstan's problems, because the largest inland dry port in the world is in Kazakhstan, big railway hub to get China's stuff to Europe. That's part of this whole process. Oil-rich region. Maybe it's a distraction to keep people from focusing on Ukraine. I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out. Just seems like a lot of things are sort of unraveling over the last few months. And that, you know, I say this and it's like everything I talked about last week, it's like, if I talk about it, it takes up the time from all the stuff that happened this week. But somebody said this about the Belt and Road Initiative. Because what does China do? They go in, they build these things, but they get loans. They make loans with the countries. And then when the country doesn't pay, what do? They get a guy like me and they go foreclose on the loan, get the assets that were backing them up. It's happening all over the world. And somebody said Belt and Road Initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative is like totalitarianism meets payday loans. That was a brilliant comment. So the other thing you're going to see is this narrative about January 6th. And it was like this. Look at this, the armed uprising. Oh, that's of 2024. It will not stop. Kimberly Strassel at the Wall Street Journal on their column on Friday said she makes a prediction about the investigation going on in Congress right now about January 6th. And she says, I can tell you right now, there's going to be stuff that's never talked about. Like Congress has its own police force. Congress runs that building. Why didn't they call in more people? And I think I showed you this last week, sort of the narrative, the picture in this Newsweek article. See how the flames have a certain silhouette shape to them. You have editorials that all these people that did January 6th are going to have a civil war. And there's like these huge articles this week on this anniversary. This is from the Washington Post, the newspaper of one of the world's richest technocrats. Red flag. Look at this, the attack. Red flags. And the pictures. This is the Atlantic. I actually like the Atlantic. Trump's next coup has already begun. Cover story. January 6th was practiced. So the narrative is, if you want to put in rules on counting votes and that type of thing, you are an extremist and you are anti-democracy. And there's editorial after editorial all over the place. We don't live in a democracy, which is true. We don't. We live in a constitutional republic. We have the electoral college. Some smart guys, 250 years ago or so, said, it's possible that in the future there might be big population centers of largely lunatic people, and we don't want them to run everything. So we're going to divide. It's one of the most ingenious things ever. Thank the Lord that they thought of it. It was brilliant. But now, that's not democracy. You better believe it's not democracy. That's how a constitutional republic runs. Go relearn history. You've been duped by all this Marxist, democratic, socialist stuff that you've done. Look at one of the other things that's in this Atlantic article. Missing. The great fake child sex trafficking epidemic. Well, we know where they're coming from. I got to finish with this. I'm already over. We call this the second hour and a half. So the standing joke is, years ago when I was teaching another church, took Chuck Missler's The Bible in 24 Hours, and I split it up, and I thought, I go over a little bit, so I'll take 24, that goes into 48, I'll be gone a couple weeks. So I called it the Bible in 1 year. You remember that, some of you? I can, even in the dark, I can see you nodding your heads. And eventually became the Bible in about a year, remember? And then they had a pool on my 50th birthday as to when John Haller, by a date when you think John Haller will finally finish this thing. And they had like a 5 or 6 year calendar. They're very funny people here, very funny. But we have this conflict over race in our culture. And so we know the problems with the prosecutor in St. Louis, the prosecutor in San Francisco, who's the son of terrorist. And he was raised, so his parents were in prison, so he got raised by Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, is my understanding. I think I have that right. And how many of you would like, hey, I've got an apartment, you can have it, just move to San Francisco, it's free. Anybody going to do that right now? If you are, we need to talk after. So now Los Angeles, Garcon, facing a recall, I think. Chase or Chaz, whatever he's called, in San Francisco facing a recall. And now the new prosecutor in New York City. Here is what he has said. I'm not going to lock up bad guys for the crimes they commit. This guy is so woke. He is a leftist. And the mayor of New York said on public policy as relating to crime and that type of thing, we're joined at the hip. So don't think that this new mayor of New York is going to give anything other than, he'll be not as an offensive oaf as de Blasio was. Be a nice guy. You want to take him out for coffee and a steak or something. He won't come over to your house unless you're, that. But here's his first day one memo. I'm stopping incarceration. I I thought I had notes here, but I'll tell you in essence what it is. If you go into a 7-Eleven or a convenience store, a small store, they're all over New York, with a gun, and you commit a robbery, if nobody gets hurt, or if it doesn't like anybody's going to get hurt because you're just waving the gun around, you will be charged with petty larceny, which is a misdemeanor. Now, what do you think bad people are going to do when they hear that? I saw interviews with business owners in New York. This is the lawlessness of the last days, my friends. This is unmistakable now. So petty larceny, drug crimes, that type of thing, all will be misdemeanors. Murder, you can be incarcerated and held on reduced bail. There will be no bail holdings, but you will be given some kind of bail. And so prison time is out, except for murder, rape, sex crimes, domestic assault, and public corruption. Because why? Because there's somebody they want to send to jail for public corruption. Right? Okay, I will give you a 5-word word. This is a Jeopardy answer. He funded this DA's campaign. $1 million, to the tune of $1 million. Who is? Bingo, you will now be, that's a $200 answer on Jeopardy, because that's the easy one. And look at this is where I'll start. This is from the UK. First of all, here's a warning. I think this is from the Times. Warning, cannabis psychosis warning for liberal parents. Oh. Yeah. What's the old saying? Why, I have a master's in criminology. Why do you think they call it dope? See prior slides for the guy who says we're not going to prosecute any of those crimes. And then look at here at the top article, 1 in 4 forces, these are prosecutors, shoot up to the top there. 1 in 4, there we go. 1 in 4 forces won't charge over drugs. That's the prosecutors in the UK. The police are upset in New York. They're saying, why do we even come to work? I mean, why do we work hard on these things? Why do we risk life and limb to arrest somebody who did an armed robbery that you now call petty larceny? Petty larceny. So, folks, this is one of the greatest cities in the world. I love New York. I even loved New York back in the 80s when it was not so nice. It was dirty, it was seedy, and then a mayor came in the 90s and really cleaned it up, and it became really pretty nice. In some parts that were so seedy you wouldn't even go there. It almost became like a Disneyland, Times Square. This is part of the acceleration, the convergence, the logistics. And now the question is, are we wise enough to understand the gravity of the times that we live in and what that means and what we should be doing as people of God who've been saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ based on his coming to earth, living a perfect life, his death on a cross, and his resurrection, and should be part of the message, his coming back to set up a kingdom and rid the world of this and rule in righteousness. So let's pray that we will be able to take that message to as many people as possible. Let's pray. Lord, thank you very much for the blessing that you gave us to live at this time of human history when we can show people in this dark, 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 dark world the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. All God's people said, amen.